What's up, guys? Welcome to Comic Den 316. I'm your host, Ace Knuckles. Today we're going to talk about DC Rebirth. Before we jump into this story, we have to talk about a couple of other stories first. The first story we're going to talk about is Flashpoint. Now, I'm not going to go into any great detail here because there are plenty of places you can go to. You can go to Comics Explained, Comic Storian, a million other places on YouTube that will be able to explain it a lot better than I can and go into a lot more detail and kind of the history of those things. This is just going to be a really brief rundown of Flashpoint and the New 52 and then leading into Rebirth so that I can lay some groundwork for my future episodes on the Comic Den. We're going to be covering some stories from DC Rebirth like Batman and The Flash and stuff like that. And I just want to kind of give my listeners a little bit to work with so that it won't be super in-depth, but you'll get the gist of it. So, let's talk about Flashpoint. Barry Allen goes back in time to save his mom from being murdered by Eobard Thawne. Once he does stop the murder, everything changes. He's back up in the present. He wakes up. He's not quite sure what's going on, but Barry Allen no longer has his power. Also, we find out that Bruce Wayne died in the alley instead of his parents. Thomas, in his grief, has become Batman, who actually kills people. It's an amazing story. You guys should all go check it out. You can read Flashpoint. Also read all the tie-ins that go into Flashpoint because those are all really good. We also find out that Martha Wayne becomes the Joker. In her grief, she just kind of went crazy, lost it, and turned into the Joker. Aquaman and Wonder Woman are at war, and so the Atlanteans and Wonder Woman are all fighting. We also have Superman, who when he crashed, instead of being raised by his parents, he got picked up by the U.S. government and they locked him in some basement where he couldn't get any sunlight, so he's just this skinny guy who can't really do a whole lot. In general, everything in this world sucks. Except for the story. The story's awesome. I recommend everybody goes out and reads it. For real. Go check it out. Without giving too many spoilers away, Barry Allen goes back in time once he gets his powers back and lets his mom die. And then everything should be set back to normal. However, when he does get back into the normal time, this is the beginning of the New 52. And the New 52 was supposed to be a jumping on point for people who wanted to get into comics, but they didn't feel they had the history down, so they couldn't just jump right into the middle of a story because they wouldn't understand it. So the theory behind the New 52 is they were starting from the very beginning. Superheroes had only been around for about 5 years, so they didn't have a whole lot of history. At first, a lot of the titles were doing really well. They were pretty good stories. They were interesting stories. They were kind of hitting on a bunch of the old tropes that they had way back in the golden age of comics and coming up through with the good stories that people really enjoyed listening to. But people started getting really upset when the titles started following new paths. So you have a new Wally West, you have Wonder Woman and Superman hooking up instead of Superman and Lois Lane, which got a lot of people mad because it's always been Superman and Lois Lane. Also, Aquaman's awesome and people just can't handle it. I really like the New 52 Aquaman. This was Aquaman's chance to come out and reestablish himself as legit, and I think they did it. Having said that, lots of other titles were terrible. You had titles like Batman, and you had titles like Aquaman, and you had a couple others that were really good, but then all the other ones just kind of fell off. And so DC decided, hey, we've got to do something else. We've got to figure this out. Our sales are tanking. We're not doing great. We've got to get this fixed. So what they did was they got Jeff Johns to figure out how he can fix this. And if you want somebody to fix your comic, you get Jeff Johns to write it. Jeff Johns is going down in history as the best comic book writer of all times. The best. No one else better. Anything that Jeff Johns writes, I'll read. It's just insane the level of storytelling that he's got. So with Rebirth, we find out that when Barry Allen was coming back through the time stream after letting his mother die, someone reached in and tinkered with time. They actually stole 10 years of their lives. In New 52, they'd been around for 5 years, but what we find out is that 10 years had been messed with. And they forgot things, they had new memories put in. This was DC's way of saying, okay, now we can go through and pick and choose what stories are canon and which stories are garbage. We get to take a little bit here and add it. We take this out and we make sure that it's never spoken of again because that's not part of the story. The question becomes, who messed with time? Now, by now, we all know it's Dr. Manhattan. I mean, we're 4 issues into Doomsday Clock by now, so we all know kind of what's going on. We're just waiting to see how it all pans out. I'm not going to go into the Watchmen right now. That's just a huge story. Again, go to Comics Explained. He does a whole series on the Watchmen, covers them in depth, talks about everything. He actually goes to before the Watchmen, covers those. It's a very in-depth look at the Watchmen. Or you can just go watch the movie. The movie's great too. So Rebirth opens with narration. We find out it's the original Wally West. He shows up to Batman and tries to get him to remember who he is. He says, "Hey, I'm Wally West. You gotta remember me. You need to remember me so that I can come back." Batman can't remember him, so Wally gets sucked back into the Speed Force. The next few pages are Wally's history. It's just him kind of going through and remembering the Teen Titans, remembering Crisis on Infinite Earth, remembering the Flash family. And this is an excellent way to just show how much was taken from everyone, how many memories were ripped from people, and then kind of Mod Podge put together in this semi-cohesive sort of way. People are feeling that something's missing, but they can't quite put their finger on it. And now that Wally West is showing up, more people are going to start saying, hey, you know what? That nagging feeling that I've had that something's been missing, this is what it is. This person, this being reached in and adjusted 10 years of our life so that we wouldn't remember specific things. It also shows that the original Teen Titans, the Flash family, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and a whole bunch of other stuff are actually in canon. So it shows that these great stories from the past, these great aspects of stories from the past, are still part of the story. They're still part of this DC universe. It's a very, very smart way of Jeff Johns going through and saying, you know what? All the stories that you love are in the DC universe. The stories that you don't love are not in the DC universe. The next thing we see is just this black hand reaching out of this blue-white lightning. And then there's this beautiful picture of Wally just falling into the Speed Force. And I just want to take a second here and talk about the art that DC has. And I know there's different artists for each comic book and each series and each story, but the art of DC is just bright colors, clean lines, really vivid pictures, and I love that about DC. I've always just been attracted to the art of DC Comics. So next we have this man who's running from these orderlies at some sort of hospital or facility. Wally shows up and tells him to go find the Justice Society. Now, this is where my lack of historical knowledge in comics and DC Comics specifically really shows itself. I know the Justice Society was kind of the original Justice League. You had a whole different set of heroes other than Batman and Superman. You had a different Green Lantern, you had a different Flash, but later on, I believe DC said, oh, those were Earth 2 superheroes. The Earth 1 superheroes are Barry Allen and Hal Jordan for the Green Lanterns. And this is what the Justice League looks like. The Justice Society was over here, now we're over here. So I don't know kind of where Jeff Johns is going with this, but I know they should have some bigger role in all of it. And it's Jeff Johns showing that the Justice Society is a real thing. It really happened. So he's rolling that over into the main DC universe. The rest of Rebirth is just kind of going through and hitting on different characters. And I don't necessarily know who all of them are. I know they hint towards the Atom. They say the Atom has shrunk himself down and gone somewhere else, and so they need to find him. I haven't read all of the titles in Rebirth, so I don't know where these are going. But they also touch on the Blue Beetle, which I don't read. They touch on Dr. Fate, and I don't know if he's showing up in other comics. I don't know. I know he showed up in Dark Knight's Metal, but I don't know where they've been taking him. They also touch on Jessica Cruz and the Green Lanterns, which, again, I don't really have anything to do with. I don't read those. I'm going to get into them because I've heard the really good stories. They show Damian Wayne blowing out some candles for his 13th birthday and he's all by himself. They show Aqualad. They show all of these characters that have been in the New 52. They're just showing, hey, here's what's going on with him. They will be moving forward. And it's a really smart way of doing it. It kind of touches base with a few things and shows that, okay, these are real things that are being dealt with. Again, it kind of sucks that I don't know a whole lot about DC history right now as of yet. But again, to fill in these holes, if you really want to know more, go watch Comics Explained. Rob does a very good job of showing you the ins and outs, the history, what you need to know. He puts it in real concise, short videos of about 20-30 minutes at the most, or you can watch entire runs. For in-depth history, I would suggest going over there. It keeps on going, just hitting on different characters, talking about how they're different. It talks about Green Arrow and Black Canary, how they act like they barely know each other, but before they were married, they were in love. Talks about the new Superman and the old Superman who has shown up on this Earth. And then we also get introduced to a new character called Mr. Oz. Here, we have no idea who he is. They call him Mr. Oz, so everybody thought originally it was Ozymandias from the Watchmen story, but turns out it's not him. And I'll let you guys read through and figure out who it is for real if you don't know. Then we cut to Aquaman, and he proposes to Mira. At this point, we cut to another scene. All the superheroes are in a park. Somebody's died, and Wally West shows up to Linda Park, his old wife, before the New 52 happened. And he tries to say, hey, I'm back. It's me. It's Wally West. I'm your husband. She doesn't remember him. So he gets sucked right back into the Speed Force storm. At this point, he starts kind of giving up. Wally says, if she can't remember me, then nobody's going to remember me. And they have Wally flying through the Speed Force storm. And then in between those panels, it cuts to Batman. Then it goes to Wally. Then it goes to Swamp Thing, which is awesome. I just read the first run of Swamp Thing in the New 52, and it was amazing. I'd never read any Swamp Thing other than times that he had crossed over. And it's a really good story. Scott Snyder did it. Again, Scott Snyder's one of those authors who, if he writes it, it's going to be good. And so I got into it. They do a good job of giving some backstory, but not bogging you down with backstory. All you need to know is that he's Swamp Thing, here's how it happened, here's what Swamp Thing is, and then they move forward with the story. Another one that eventually I'll cover, I'm also looking for somebody to do an episode with me on it. I think that'd be pretty cool. So Wally's going through, he goes to villains, he goes to Cyborg, he goes to Dick Grayson, he goes to all of these people to try to figure out, hey, somebody's got to remember me. Nobody does, so he keeps flying back and forth through the Speed Force storm. He's slowly getting weaker and weaker, thinking that he's not going to be able to get back. And we start to see him say things like, okay, well, at least the title of Kid Flash will be in good hands. He's kind of just resigning to his fate, and as a last-ditch effort, he says, okay, well, I'm going to try to show up to Barry Allen, see if he remembers me. He shows up, he says, you don't know who I am, and you won't remember me. And so he starts to kind of disintegrate. We see pieces of him flying off. As he starts to disappear, Barry Allen reaches out and grabs him, and he goes, Wally. And that's the lightning rod that he needed, and all of a sudden, Wally West is pulled back into the universe. He's pulled out of the Speed Force storm. Here's the thing that they have to kind of deal with is we have this Wally West, and it's not like all the memories come back for Barry Allen. He's not quite sure what's going on, why he forgot. He remembers who Wally West is. He doesn't remember the entire history of Wally West. He remembers bits and pieces, which make for an interesting story, because if he just remembered everything, then they wouldn't be able to stretch out this DC Rebirth that long. It would be, oh, so now we know exactly what's going on. I remember all of these other things, and so now we can just go fight whatever being it is that did this. But with there being holes, it gives you a chance to, okay, Wally West is going to go and join the Titans, which the Titans don't remember him either. The Titans don't even remember that they used to be a team called the Titans. So it's really interesting what's going on here and how Jeff Johns has given the ability for all these writers to fill in all of these gaps on their own. So then after that, they cut back to Batman, and I love how it starts off with a 4-panel page, which is kind of classic comic book, going to the square panels instead of all these splash pages and weird triangles and stuff like that. Then the next page cuts to a 9-panel page. And for those of you who have read The Watchmen, you know that that entire book is just about nothing but 9-panel pages. And so it's that callback to the Watchmen. It's that callback to, hey, here's what we're doing. So Batman's sitting there chiseling things out. He's looking around. He thinks the Joker's the one who had a hand in all this. But he's thinking, who is that guy that showed up to me? Who is that guy that showed up? And he referenced the Flashpoint. So he's got this letter from his dad from the Flashpoint universe that Barry Allen had brought back. And he starts chiseling at this little thing in the wall that he had seen. And it turns out it's the button from the comedian in the Watchmen universe. So somehow that button got thrown through the time stream, the universe, whatever it is, and lodged itself in the Batcave. And so the last scene of this chapter is Batman holding the comedian's button. Now, we go into another 9-panel page, and it's this watch that's broken on Mars. You can tell it's Mars because it's all red and dusty and stuff like that. And the watch just starts floating up, and it starts assembling itself. And then it goes from just a watch, and it zooms in, and then it turns into the watch from the Watchmen. All the while, Dr. Manhattan is saying things. And it goes from a white text box, and the last 3 panels are the light blue that you would get any time that Dr. Manhattan talked in the Watchmen universe. So that's DC Rebirth. I know I went really fast. I know I skimmed over a lot of stuff. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been Comic Den 316. If you like what I do here, hit the subscribe button. If you like this episode, drop a like. Make sure you hit that little gray bell so that you get notifications. I'm out.